Hello again, everybody. Can I ask you to... So, hello again and welcome. I'm still Joyce Resin, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Frailty Network. And I'm also the chair of the Citizen Engagement Committee of the CFN Network. And I'll be your moderator today for this session. So I really want to say thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your interest in listening to, hearing the voices of older adults living with frailty and their friend and family caregivers. We really appreciate your interest, and we're going to engage you in this conversation as we go along. Before I start, though, you will notice the postcards. I want to remind you of the postcards that are on your tables. We need to get the message of frailty in front of our politicians, in front of the community at large, our friends, our families, organizations, whomever. Please take a moment to write your name on the back of the postcard. You can simply drop it off in the, there is, what do you call it, a bucket outside at the registration desk, or you can take them home and share them with your friends, with your organizations, etc. But really and truly, it's a part of our Avoid Frailty campaign, and it's the only way that we're going to get this message in front of more people, and it needs to be there. So, the session today was developed by the Citizen Engagement Committee of the CFN, and by some very, very hardworking people. You're going to meet some of them on the panel, and there are a couple, I'm missing one over here, there's a couple at these flip charts who are going to be taking copious notes from the panel and also notes from the comments that you folks are going to make during this session. I was wondering, how many of you were here last year at our CFN conference? Just put up your hands, please. Great. Oh, good. So a good number were, because you may remember that there was a very excellent presentation by Lisa Peterson from ABSPOR, the Alberta Spore Organization, about engagement, citizen-patient engagement, the importance, the benefits, etc. At the end of her presentation, she asked those of you that were there to write down any further questions that you have or questions that you wanted to really dive into. Excuse me, Jerry, you're over there. Any questions that you wanted us to dive into? And you had lots of questions. We looked at at least 75 questions. But when the Citizen Engagement Committee looked at those questions, we saw that we could actually clump them into 4 main thematic areas. Those areas are: 1, recruitment. How do you find older adults living with frailty and their caregivers to engage them in the first place? How do you reach out to them? Number 2, retention. Once we engage them on our teams, how do we keep them interested, motivated, and involved? Number 3, ethics and compensation. And we put those two together. How do we ensure issues of confidentiality and, what's appropriate, what's possible for compensating citizens for their time and involvement. And then the 4th area is measurement. We don't do a good job of it, guys. Quality improvement measurement. So how do we know that the engagement is successful for both the citizen and the PI and the research team? So those are the 4 areas that we're going to discuss today, and we're going to do a deeper dive into those areas. We'll be hearing from a very distinguished panel. We'll be hearing from you. We want to share your ideas. And it is really a conversation, because this is, in fact, still a bit of a work in progress. But before we go there, I am so pleased to introduce you to 2 remarkable and inspirational women. I'm going to join them over here. Hi, can we get this mic to work? Is this working now? Can you hear me? Oh, great. Okay, thank you. So, 2 remarkable and inspirational women. Dr. Olive Bryanton from Prince Edward Island, pardon me for that, and Marlyn Gill from Calgary, Alberta. Now, I want you to know that both of these women are researchers themselves. They've been engaged with research teams, and they're tireless advocates for the engagement of elderly citizens in research. So I want to welcome both of you. Thank you in advance for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm going to start with you, Olive. Should I call you Dr. Bryanton?
Olive is fine.
Oh, you can use your mic now. I think it should be.
Olive is fine.
Olive is fine, thanks. And I say that because Olive, just recently, this past May at 81, just received her PhD.
82.
Excuse me, she told me she's 82. So you can all clap again. So Olive was doing a study on aging in place. And Olive, as I understand, just to summarize it very quickly, you engaged 10 elderly women between the ages of 85 and 91 who lived in rural PEI in a study on what they felt they needed to stay healthy, age with dignity in place. How in the world did you recruit them?
Well, I think I thought I was going to be able to choose them, but ethics told me differently. So I had to advertise what I was doing and that I needed participants. So they had to contact me. And I have to say my committee, or they call themselves Team Olive, didn't think I would get them at that age. Anyway, I had no problem getting them. I had the participants call me themselves. I also had family members saying, oh, I think Mom should be involved in this. But the reality was Mom wasn't interested. So you have to tell them what you want and what you need, and they're there for you.
So you say you advertised. You advertised where?
Okay, through our local CBC, both radio and TV, and through our local daily newspaper.
So these are women who have had never had any experience with research projects, who are well into their 80s and 90s, who called you and said, I want to be involved in research. What does that say? Because we don't normally think of people being that willing.
It tells us that everybody is wanting to learn and willing to share their knowledge because they are the experts in what they need and want.
Can you tell me a little bit, Olive, about what technique you used to find out, to hear from them, to hear their voices, and what did you do to kind of keep them interested? Because those 10 women became part of your team, really. They were not simply participants.
No, they were involved with, the method I used was photo voice, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tool for people. And so they were given cameras to take pictures of what supported or limited their ability to age in place. And we had individual meetings, we had team meetings. Actually, all of the participants were involved with me for 8 months. And so they really became part of it, they felt part of it, and I think that's how you retain people, is give them a meaningful role and listen and learn from them.
Thank you. We'll have lots more questions. So Marlyn, I want to bring you into this conversation. Marlyn, you work with an Alberta-based organization called PACER. I'm sure many of you have heard of PACER, the Patient and Family Engagement Research Program out of the University of Calgary. And that program trains patients, citizens, and caregivers to actually become partners in research projects. How did you get recruited, you personally, 7 years ago?
Is this on? No?
Speak right into the mic. I think it is
way?
on.
That way?
Yeah, a little closer to your mouth.
Ah. Can I give you this one instead? Oh, of course.
Thank you. Technology.
Is this one more? Oh, yeah. Whoa. Magic. Okay, I got involved totally by mistake. I had, yeah, seriously, it's a story of, it's, you know those doors that open, and if you go through, and if you don't, then you lose out? It was one of those. I had been waiting for 8 months to have a hip replacement done. Went along to see my orthopedic surgeon, whom I had been assigned to. He took 2 minutes to look at my film. He came in and said, "I can't do your surgery, it's far too complex." I was not happy because I had waited in the wrong line for 8 months. And so what I did was go home and get online and think, I'm going to find an ombudsman. And of course, there was no ombudsman, there was no nothing, but there was a site called Patients Matter. So I thought, darn right, patients matter. So I did open it up, and lo and behold, it was an invitation to become a researcher. They were looking for patients with arthritis to be trained in a pilot program, to become a year-long pilot program, to become qualitative researchers with other patients. And so I signed up, and I'm still here.
And she has never looked back because Marlyn told me that she's currently now working with 5 research teams. She's either helping to write proposals or consulting with on various issues or interviewing other patients about their needs depending on the project. When I heard about this, I was exhausted. How do you deal with that issues like, exhaustion, fatigue, all of these kinds of things that come to plague us?
When I'm tired, I go to bed. I'm serious. I'm sorry. It's that simple.
How many of you do that?
I know I do not produce good work when I'm tired. Why would I want to produce substandard work? So I give up, I go to bed, I have a rest, I get up, and I can function. I live alone. Doesn't matter if it's the middle of the night, does it? If I am functional, I will work. If I'm not, I won't.
And the teams appreciate that and understand that.
Absolutely. The teams know
Okay.
when they work with patients that there are days you're not going to be as bright as you might be another day.
Okay. Can we talk about that, Olive, as well? How do you deal with those issues? I'm sure with some of your participants, there's fatigue and or time constraints, particularly with caregivers. We're going to hear about that later. What was your technique or your approach?
Well, I think I got tired more often than my participants did. They were just balls of energy. They did protect themselves in the fact that they would say, well, I don't want to do anything early in the morning, and certainly not after I have my dinner in the evening. But in between, they were pretty gun-ho. They were amazing.
So it's simply a question of respecting their needs and their time constraints.
Yep.
How did you compensate those women? I mean, they became part of your team, really. They were not just simply participants that kind of came and went.
They became part of my team, and the only way I could compensate them was to give them the digital cameras that they were using to take pictures. And so I thought that was a small amount to recognize what they provided me. They were happy with it, and they enjoyed being part of the whole process. Their biggest enjoyment was when they met together as a group.
Meeting together as a group?
Yes.
Interesting.
We met individually, and then we met as a group. And that's what they enjoyed the most, was when they got together.
And they learned how to use the digital cameras?
Yes, I had one woman, she was 90. She had never had a camera in her hand. And so when she took her first picture with the digital camera, it was just amazing to see her face.
I wish I was in your study.
Oh, she was just a very quick learner, I can tell you.
Right. And Marlyn, how about you, all the work that you put in? Are you compensated?
Yes, I get paid for my work, depending. Sometimes, if it's a large project, there's a sort of, large amount of money, not huge amount of money, obviously, because it's research, but there's money that is given to PACER, and each person who takes part in the research, and I'm a lead PACER, gets paid a certain amount for the work, and we work it out on a kind of basic hourly basis. Given that I'm slower than other people and some people, we just sort of even it all out. So I am paid for the research I do. Chelsia has paid me for the research I do.
Can I ask you how much? I'm sure that there's some other people wondering.
Just in case you are wondering, when it's costed out, it comes around for a lead PACER, which is different than a new one, okay? But because of my experience, I'll get probably between $40 and $45 an hour, which is very, very good. That's good research, right?
It's pretty amazing. I'm sure there'll be some questions about that afterwards. Okay, I have a million questions, and I'm sure that the audience has a million questions as well. But we do want to hear from the panel. One last question to both of you, very quickly. Speaking to these researchers and healthcare professionals out here, have you got any sort of last words of advice you'd like to share when they go out to try to engage with people living with frailty and their family and friend caregivers?
Well, I think we have to get rid of ageism, because ageism is holding people back of all ages. So we have to recognize the value of older adults in our community, stop looking at them as vulnerable people, but people with capacities, and how can we help them build on those capacities.
Thank you. Wow.
Don't
Marlyn.
underestimate us. Please, give us a chance. That's all we need. We have a voice. Every single person wants, if you invite them as experts, and we are experts, the people we work with, our participants are experts. If they believe they are experts and we invite them that way, they will give you a marvelous amount of information that you need. Don't underestimate us.
What did you say at the beginning? You said something and I didn't hear because everybody was clapping.
What? Don't underestimate.
Don't underestimate us.
Don't, just think about us as ordinary people. Don't look at me and say, oh, golly, I wonder if she can manage. If I can't, I'll tell you.
Okay. Thank you very much, both Olive and Marlyn, and we'll have some opportunity for questions after we hear from our panelists. But that was very, very enlightening. So now I do want to introduce our very diverse panel, all of whom have deep understanding and experience with engaging people living with frailty and their family and friend caregivers. The first person that I want to introduce is Chelsia. Chelsia Gillis is a member of the Citizen Engagement Committee of CFN. That's her most important credential. But Chelsia is a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary in epidemiology and a research mentor for the PACER program that Marlyn Gill has just described. So, and I understand as well, Chelsia, that you took that program yourself in order to be able to understand better how to engage older adults in your research. Is that right? Okay, so come on up, and each of our panelists will speak for 3 to 4 minutes, and I'm a real taskmaster about that, so we'll leave room for your questions after.
Hi, I'm really thrilled to be here. I thought I'd just start by telling a very short story. Whenever I started out as a researcher, my background is as a dietitian, I wanted to survey patients to understand why they weren't eating the food in hospital. And I came back to my boss and said, my results say that 85% of patients in hospital think the food is excellent, so I'm not really understanding what the problem is here. And around the same time, I had a caregiver go up and collect one of my last surveys, and she had questioned the the person, oh, you think the food's really good, but you have food on your tray. Why didn't you eat it? And she said, oh, I didn't want to get that nice dietitian in trouble. So I learned then the value of peer-to-peer research. So now what I do is I work with Marlyn exclusively. I have my claws on her, but I know that there's actually some other Albertans here who also work with her exclusively, who are in this audience too. Over here, yep. And so Marlyn and I co-lead a lot of projects together. When I do quantitative work, she informs me on how I should approach patients, how I should ask the questions properly in a less clinical way. And when I do qualitative work, Marlyn leads that work. When we do focus groups together, when I hear the clinical things that I think are really interesting, I probe more on that. She hears the patient things that are really interesting, she probes more on that. So we work really well as a team. And then when we analyze our data together, we actually come up with almost identical conclusions, except mine are always very clinical, and hers always look at it from the patient point of view. So we have a really great partnership, I think. If I have some tips, because I was asked what are my tips in patient engagement, I would say that one is don't assume, which is what Marlyn said. Don't assume what your patient partners can and can't do, ask them. Two would be respect the way that they want to participate. If I have a really long meeting, it doesn't mean that I'll ask Marlyn if she wants to attend. If she doesn't want to attend, she can get an update later, or she can attend from her bed and call in, right? Number three is respect the expertise by paying them. I put in every grant money so that I can pay Marlyn to do the work that she does. And number four, I think, is don't overthink it. I engage Marlyn in my research as a co-lead, but we work together just the same way I talk to the health economist on my team when I consult him. It's just another expertise that I look for consultation to make my work better. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Chelsia. How many of you do your work from your bed? Or in pajamas with teleconference now. But how important is that, particularly for people who are challenged by issues of frailty? Our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce, is also a member of the Citizen Engagement Committee of CFN, and she's going to be talking about this issue from the perspective of an administrator. I want to introduce you to Kelly Kay. And Kelly is the Executive Director of the Seniors Care Network of the Central East Region of Ontario, and she's also Interim Co-Executive Director of the Provincial Geriatric Leadership Office. Kelly.
So I'm a person who doesn't speak briefly, so I have an army over there of colleagues who are going to flag me down if I go on too long. Thank you very much for letting me be part of the panel. It's an honor. And I do want to talk a little bit about the organizational processes that might enable research, and I have a few points that I'd like to make. One is really to take the time to get executives excited about the work. When people like me get excited about research, we can do things that can enable an ongoing research platform. So one of the things that I did within my organization is I asked my board to make it part of our mandate. So we now have community-based applied research as part of our mandate, which gives me license to allow team members time to do research projects. And so just as an example of what that means is now this year we have a team, we only have 4 people in our team, but we're leading 6 research projects, and we have 10 presentations and posters going forward to conferences in the next 2 months. So it's just an example of if you can inspire the executives to get interested. You can also make them genuinely curious, and that's happened for me, and that's also been fostered by my own participation in CFN and as a fellow, and that also has led me to continued scholarship. So just an example. The other thing about organizational processes that can enable your research and engaging the administrators is that we are often influential on the budgets. And so if you're looking at ways to ensure that there's compensation, maybe that might not be possible within the grant structure that you have, but there's ways within organizational budgets that your participants may be able to be compensated. So, or we can give good ideas around the framing of research budgets. So we just, I'm involved in a project that Sarah will speak more eloquently about in a moment, and one of the things we put into that budget was compensation for respite care so that caregivers could attend. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that there's, to take the time as you're pursuing research activity to build relationships outside the research effort. It makes it very easy then to recruit and retain people if you've built long-standing relationships. So we've had very long-standing relationships with participants on my board. We have 3 citizens on our board, older adult citizens on our board, and when we want to mount projects, they are a great conduit to people to participate and have been instrumental in helping us develop an older adult experience survey and a caregiver experience survey. And the last thing I wanted to mention was our recent experience with research ethics boards, and this might be an area that's maybe for future development. I've been involved in a project where the project was focused around building a competency framework for dementia care with people who live with dementia, and it was very hard to get the research ethics committee to understand the participation of people with dementia in that project. I think there was a bit of doubt that people living with dementia could participate in the way we were hoping they would. And so that was an exercise for us to go back to that organization, and I think I heard an example from one of my panelists as we were chatting before the meeting of how we have to sometimes work with ethics boards to have them understand the nature of this kind of collaborative research and the participation of older adults as researchers and as participants in the projects. And the last thing I think I can mention, am I still safe there, my colleagues? Yes, thank you, is the role of administrators and health leaders can often be a bit of a shepherd in the process. I've sat in many forums, not necessarily within the research world, but within the consultation world, where there's an effort to consult with people, with older adults, but the results are lost by the holder of the pen, the attempt to sort of sanitize the feedback or censor the feedback that we may be receiving. So I think that's another effort, another piece of advice that I would give is to be mindful about who's holding the pen in your efforts, making sure that you're translating things truly to how you're hearing them, and I think that's a role that I've taken on as a health leader to make sure I don't and I guard against others in my sphere of influence from undoing the great feedback that we actually want to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. A really important perspective. So we've been talking mostly about how do we engage, what are some of the issues and challenges in engaging older adults living with frailty, but very often the reality is it's really their caregivers, friend and family caregivers, neighbors, whoever it is, that need to be engaged in order for us to really hear what the needs are of the person living with frailty. So we're going to shift a little bit now and look at that issue. And our first speaker is Sarah Gibbens. Sarah is a registered nurse and clinical nurse specialist in geriatrics. She's currently the Knowledge to Practice Specialist for the Regional Geriatric Programs of Ontario Senior Friendly Caregiver Education Project. That's a mouthful. And she is also an interdisciplinary fellow at the Canadian Frailty Network and a newlywed. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Joyce, and the CFN Citizen Engagement Committee for having me. So I'm just going to jump right into it. You won't be able to pull me away from the microphone, so don't even try. The purpose of our project, I'm going to talk about quality improvement, not so much research. So the purpose of our project is to create educational resources for family and friend caregivers of seniors who experience frailty. The RGPO decided that the way to build meaningful resources is to actually work with caregivers to understand what they want to learn and how they prefer to learn about frailty. So just quickly, we traveled to 10 communities across Ontario. We spoke to a total of 133 caregivers, and our resources cover 8 topics: caring for the caregiver, pain, staying active, nutrition, bladder health, medication management, changes in thinking and behavior, which is your delirium, and social engagement. So let me talk about recruitment. So our team recruited caregivers to be participants in focus group sessions in a number of ways. We used websites, social media, emailed from our own networks. We shared our event with community centers, and then we also used traditional forms like newspaper. And we also used really key healthcare professionals to spread the event to the caregivers that they had direct contact with. And these healthcare professionals worked in geriatrics. They knew the population very well, and they knew the community that they worked in really well. And of all the ways that caregivers told us that they heard about our event, was over 50% of them said they heard it first from a healthcare professional. So that's how much engagement they have with the health system, given the complexity of the person that they're caring for at home. So we hosted focus groups in venues that were popular, that were familiar to caregivers, they were accessible, we kept our sessions free, and we served a hot lunch. We considered barriers to recruitment, so that's where the compensation piece kind of comes in. It would be a barrier to recruitment to assume that a caregiver who's incredibly busy, working 24/7, unpaid, has the time to come and talk about their experience. So we provided respite care for the person in whatever relationship that they already had with the community. We provided reimbursement for travel. We paid for people's parking. And just a last note about recruitment before I move on to retention. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir, but when we recruited, we didn't say, are there any informal caregivers out there? We don't use that language. It was Caregivers Nova Scotia that really influenced us. They'd done a lot of good work in the way we used the language. So I think we actually were able to recruit more people, given we weren't calling them informal. There's nothing informal about what they do. So how to keep people engaged once recruited. Page 2, oh no. So it was about listening. To keep people engaged in the project and in the co-design, it was about listening, and actually more than listening, it's about showing that proving that you've heard the caregiver. So what we did is we reported back what we heard. Did we get this right? Are we hearing you right? No? Okay, let's fix that. We asked people if and how they wanted to remain in the work. It was about being flexible with their needs, their skills, flexible with their time. So beyond the focus groups, people who wanted to participate in committees, maybe some actually just wanted to disseminate the final product. Some wanted to be testers of an online course, and some wanted to just review one chapter of a handbook. We kept that available. And like one of my colleagues said, you provide and inform on the menu selection, and people can be driven based on their passions and their interest in the work. And I actually think what keeps people engaged in anything is the cause. I think caregivers felt that this content was incredibly valued to them, to their experience, and that they were making a difference for a group across Ontario and Canada. Storyboard poster number 10, just saying, thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and you did keep to time, so I appreciate that too. Our next speaker is from the other side of the country, and from my side of the country, it's my pleasure to introduce Barb MacLean to you, who is also a member of our Citizen Engagement Committee of CFN, and Barb is the Executive Director of the Family Caregivers of BC, formerly a caregiver herself, and she will speak to us as well about what's happening in BC about recruitment, retention, compensation, and measurement when caregivers of those living with frailty are engaged in research projects. Thanks, Barb.
Whoop, there go the heels. Thank you, Joyce. Welcome, everybody. I'm curious, could we take a poll? How many of you in this room have recruited caregivers for anything you've done? Come on, be proud, get your hand up. Okay, where are we? What do you think? Majority. That's a majority. Okay, so we have something in common today, don't we? I wanted to start off by saying that as an organizational perspective that I bring today, I also have colleagues in Nova Scotia and Alberta that have been a caregiving organization, and together we represent about 50 years of recruiting caregivers for a lot of things, primarily research, and more recently around engagements to do with health system improvement and using a quality improvement lens. So we've done it for a long time, and here are some of the themes. Number one is that the voice of a caregiver is the voices of a caregiver. The voice of a patient or a person living with frailty is that voice. They are not one and the same. So if you've got a tick box to recruit patients/caregivers or people living with frailty/caregivers, let's get rid of that. If the voice you want is a caregiving voice, it is not a proxy for that person living with frailty. If that's what you intend, you need to be really upfront about it. So point number one is they are unique and distinct. Caregivers have that experience and they have a lot to contribute. Number two, family and friend caregivers are super busy people. They're the most busy people you'll find, especially since the majority of people are balancing work and care at the same time. And that they need a lot of information up front to make the decision, am I going to participate or not? Please help me make that decision if it's a value added, if I feel I can participate. Exactly what will you ask me to do? When will you ask me to do it? Will I help in what way do you want me to participate and contribute my expertise? Where and how and for how long? Would you have the ability to poll me first before you set meetings, for example, at 8:30 when I'm helping the person I care for get dressed? I will miss that meeting. And so on. So the same consideration that you give to your colleagues, you do need to give to your participants from whether it's the person living with frailty or the caregiver. In terms of context setting, that seems to be where our roles as caregiving organizations spend the most time. They're often fearful or uncertain about how do I sit in a research or academic setting and not feel intimidated? I mean, those are my words, but that's a theme that we hear over and over again. So part of our job is to give them comfort, and we end up doing a great deal of work in recruiting, orienting, and setting the context on your behalf as researchers. We might have to rewrite your letter of invitation or your email to be caregiver friendly. That takes time. We might need to follow up and encourage people to consider the opportunity. We might need to look deeply to look at the characteristics you're asking for and then perhaps segment our list of caregivers to go and find them on your behalf. We may need to support them midway through the research experience to say, how's it going? How can we support you? What might we do to support your engagement in this research project? And they're always thankful for that. Retention of caregivers rests in something that Team Olive, go Team Olive, talked, it's about value. So if you imagine you're sitting together in any context and you don't speak, you don't feel like you have an opening to contribute, nobody asks you, you remain silent. One of the key considerations is for us to become great facilitators in any context of engagement and make sure that people have regular contribution. And with caregivers, we know that sometimes you have to say, okay, Joan, Bob, Betty, Olive, do you have some thoughts? You need to provide an opening. So one of the most significant themes we found is people will sit on committees for years and not speak up because nobody asked them to speak. So it's about confidence and having a place and a role. In between meetings, sometimes there's a lot of time, isn't there, when your research cycle continues on. Another theme is I feel in the dark. I'm not sure what's going on. I need a little bit of an update to be a better contributor at the next meeting. And let me give you an example of a great process that we've experienced recently in one engagement. They contacted both the people living with frailty and the caregivers and said, would you like to have a pre-meeting to go over the materials so that in a place of comfort, we can respond to and answer questions outside of the big meeting. That was one of the best and proactive strategies. This group also said, if that worked, what if we just took the time initially in the first few meetings to follow up after and say, so how was this meeting for you? How did you feel? Give us a little bit of feedback in a warm and comfortable way, one-on-one. It was really surprising how much people spoke in those contexts when they remained silent in the bigger committee group. Could be an advisory committee or other committee. One of the things we know about the science of belonging can apply to engaging caregivers and people living with frailty, and that is the one of, I feel valued and I feel included. We are a team, we are together, and I am one of us. So if you think about your own skills and competencies and engagement, that's one thing to think about. Finally, we have a group of people that we call frequent flyers. They become skilled and comfortable, and what happens? We keep going back to them and going back to them. To the best of their ability, they say, yes, I will do this other one. Yes, I will do this. But in terms of ethics and compensation, it presents a tricky scenario of maybe it's time to start thinking about honorariums. Maybe it's time to make sure that anything out of pocket is there. Maybe it's time to think about what they're doing in order for their care recipient to be cared for when they're spending time on other people's behalf. So it's the new frontier of compensation and volunteers or engagement participants and how we're going to handle that. It's one of the tricky things. And then finally, just think of your nonprofit organizations and family caregiver serving organizations like Family Caregivers of BC, Caregivers Alberta, Caregivers Nova Scotia, and now Ontario has its own caregiving organization. Think of us as your research partners you didn't know you had. We invest a great deal of time and expertise to find and support caregivers on your behalf. And what's surprising, probably from your perspective, is that nobody's really paying us to do so. So on that note, thanks for listening, and we really do look forward to an engaging conversation around tips and strategies.
Thank you, Barb. It's your turn. There are 2 mics in the audience, and we want to hear your comments, we want to hear your questions, and any experiences, briefly, that you might like to share of your experience of engagement with either friend and family caregivers or older adults living with frailty. So I think we have Tom up first.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate the panel. I want to wade into the swamp of compensation. For the last 2 years, I've been fairly deeply involved with the strategy for patient-oriented research. And I want to say to this collective group that 2 years ago, I had a different view on that subject of compensation for patients' time than I do now. And my view now is that we really have to get our philosophy right on this. Repeatedly in the last 2 years, I've sat around rooms that have wonderful patients offering their inputs and their advice and their knowledge and experiences. And as I look around the room, the only person not being paid is the patient. Everybody else is there often as a job or as a researcher or in some other venue whereby their time, one way or another, is being compensated. And so we now have a patient compensation policy in the strategy for patient-oriented research in BC. And I think the whole country needs to start asking itself, is it really fair? Is it really appropriate that we take the value of a patient experience and the time that comes with it and not somehow or other recognize that? That doesn't have to mean a paycheck. That doesn't have to mean a business deal. It does mean you ought to ask often what they think. So whether or not you're going to invite their time for research or for providing advice to the health system, I think we should start asking people how they would like some return for their time. And frankly, often it's not in a paycheck. It's often in many other different ways that motivate people to participate. But the notion that we shouldn't do that, it's time to change it.
Darn, Tom, you should have been on the panel. So I want to put that question actually to both Marlyn and Olive. What about this question? Does it always have to be financial? What are some other ways that citizens really feel comfortable being compensated? Marlyn, do you want to start?
Sure. I think that it depends where you are in your life, in your what your situation is, what kind of compensation as a patient one should get or take for doing research, for example. Most participants I work with do get some kind of acknowledgement, usually a gift card, okay? But those of us who do research, it does depend. We have people in our organization who are with AISH, therefore they cannot earn a certain amount over whatever, but they get a new computer perhaps, or something like that. And quite frankly, the way I see it is that when I actually worked as a family therapist, I worked as a family therapist because I enjoyed it. And everyone says, well, patients do it because they love it. Well, you know something? I like the money as well because I need it. And I'm at that stage of life where it's okay to say, how would you like to be paid? Or would you like, I know someone who gives the money to charity because they can afford to do that. But how would you like to be compensated for your expertise? Because it isn't just time, it's expertise.
Thank you, Marlyn. What about you, Olive? What would you say?
I second that motion. But also there are some people who would prefer to get something, some kind of recognition. They're not looking for pay per se. But I would not want to see volunteers being out of pocket expenses. We should always make sure those expenses are paid, and there should be some kind of recognition. If we value what they're providing, then we really should compensate.
Right. Go ahead, Kelly. It should be on.
Is that on?
Yeah, it should be.
Okay. Your question also makes me think, and I appreciate your perspectives, and I would also add, when I hear that kind of comment, I'm thinking with my administrator hat on, and I know that I run something called a geriatric education initiative. It's a fund that I created in our region for health professionals pursuing education related to geriatrics and gerontology. But I don't know why it needs to be that confined to people who hold registration as a health professional. So I appreciate the challenge, Tom, and it makes me think that I will be opening up the criteria to patients and families and caregivers who are involved with us and who want to pursue either conference registration or some sort of activity that advances our common goals.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have 2 mics here. Yes.
Wonderful panel presentation. Our research group has established a wonderful partnership with older adults and family caregivers, and that has greatly benefited our research. But we find that when we are aiming to engage with older adults, we're often connecting with those who are already themselves pretty well connected. They're maybe of a higher socioeconomic status, they're able to come out to networking events and so forth. Be interested in the comments of the panel on ideas around how we might engage with a more diverse group of older adults, those who might be marginalized, immigrant populations, Indigenous older adults, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really important question. Who would like it? Barb, would you like to try?
I'll jump in on that. I think the most important thing that we've learned is you need to go where they live. You need to go where what their communities are and find people who know people. And there's nothing better than those networks. So it could be a community organization on the ground that already has a relationship. So by relationship is the #1 way to find and get people who want to share their voice. It's hard work though, isn't it?
Sarah, go ahead.
I mentioned that healthcare professionals were a really key stakeholder, and especially the amazing ones that work directly with caregivers and older adults. They've established really trusting and ongoing relationships with people in all different types of communities. So getting to those people and involving those people as a medium was really helpful for us. Not to say that what we did was at all perfect, but geriatric healthcare professionals are like the rock, right?
Thank you. Marlyn, you wanted to jump in.
Okay, one of the things that the organization I work for has done is to invite some marginalized, not all, but we had a pilot for Indigenous researchers, so that we actually had 12 graduates come through our program who either came from a Métis settlement, lived within urban communities who were Indigenous, or who were First Nations on reserve. Those are the people who can then make the connectedness with those communities, with other Indigenous people. They have the connectedness to do it. We have had several people who have been more marginalized than, for instance, someone like me is, okay? And if we can engage those people in the research, peer-to-peer research, they can reach out to the peers, and they are much more credible than I am in getting those people.
Anybody want to share some of their experiences with engagement, either with marginalized communities or older adults? You must have had some experiences. Okay. Well, it's, I want you to turn your attention. Yes, there's somebody. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
Is this one on?
Yes.
I'm one of those people we've been talking about. I'm a patient advisor. I have made it a practice never to accept any money from any work that I do in that guise, because I feel I'm giving back. I've had a good life. I've been well paid for the work that I have done. I'm in my retirement. It's something nice for me to do. And so I would not accept money, and I never have for the last, I guess, about 8 years now of work in several different groups. I have enough money to get by quite comfortably, thank you. I don't need remuneration. I would like people to say, thank you.
Aha.
And I'm sure, going back to the original question, that there are people that you can draw into your research that do need remuneration, and that if you want those people in your projects, you should be willing to pay them.
Thank you for that. And just very briefly, I'll tell you a story, because you remind me, Jerry, of the story. So I used to work with the Patient Voices Network, which is one of the very first patient engagement organizations in this country. It developed in BC. And at the end of the first year, we thought we weren't paying anybody. And we thought, you know, we have to compensate these folks who are giving lots of time and energy somehow. And so we thought about Tim Hortons cards, Starbucks cards, right? The usual. We just didn't know how to do it. We didn't have a lot of money. And then it occurred to us, why don't we ask? As Tom suggested, why don't we ask? What would be, we didn't have money, so we weren't offering money. But what else? What could we do? Can we bring you together? What? And you know what they said? Very similar to what you're suggesting, Jerry. They said, what would be really helpful is if you told us what happened to the conversations that we had. Where is the research going, and what impact did we have? And it dawned on us that we were not telling them, right? So people were being engaged, but there was no follow through. So thank you very much, goodbye, and we'll get on with our research. And that was a very significant, partly saying thank you, but it was also partly saying, what did I contribute? You're nodding.
Yeah. PACER always asks any participant in research, do you wish to have a report? We will either send you an executive summary or we will send you our full report, which is going to whoever has paid us to do the research. And so every participant has given the opportunity to see what they have contributed to.
Thank you. If there are no other questions from the floor, I'm going to turn to our Citizen Engagement Committee members who have been working diligently at the flip charts. Can everybody see? The purpose of this, we said, oh, there is somebody. I'm sorry. Angus.
Okay.
Your
Hi.
turn.
Sorry. Angus Campbell, Caregivers, Nova Scotia. Thanks for the shout out. So one of what you were just talking about is sending follow-up reports to participants, which is fantastic, and we hear it all the time. But we also request people to write a report in lay language, and it doesn't have to be the full details, but it's that these participants can understand the effects of their participation. So that's what I was going to say is language is so important, even what we call people. And we always ask people how they prefer to be called. So, most people relate to the word caregiver. Some people with this new trend of saying care partner, so we respect that. But other people, they just don't relate to the term caregiver. They're, I'm the daughter, I'm the husband. And so we have to find out and talk in their language. That's all. Great.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Very
great presentation.
worthwhile contribution. I'm sorry to have overlooked you there. Okay, so going
Joyce,
back to our flip
Joyce,
charts, there's another one?
No, I just.
Go ahead.
Wait, microphone is. Hi. There we go. Just about that, CFN has created lay guidelines, and I don't know if you're all aware of that, but it's a great handy-dandy tool that gives you some ideas how to write in plain language and get rid of the academic lens that everybody carries around. You don't realize it? It's excellent. It's called Lay Guidelines by CFN.
Thank you very much.
PACER
I should have said it.
Can
And
I
PACER
say
does
one
too?
thing? PACER is peer-to-peer research, which means we actually don't use that much sort of jargon. Everything, the reports I write are written in plain language because they are meant for our patients and caregivers as well as the people who pay us to do them. So that they just are, it's qualitative research. You don't need to use jargon there.
Thank you very much. And now, Gill Van Dam. Jill's been listening, and Gill, very, very briefly, because we are running out of time very quickly, just give us a couple of the highlights of the conversation. Gill has been listening for recruitment and retention ideas, because as I mentioned earlier, we are going to try to produce, we will produce a tip list, for lack of a better descriptor, to send out to all of you with these ideas that have come up from the floor today.
All right, so can you hear me? Okay. So just for recruitment, obviously get creative in how the ways you are recruiting people. So through social media, through newspapers, through TV. I think all of you mentioned CBC specifically. So that was one. The other big one that came up a few times by a couple people was building relationships with people in the community as a means to build those connections and recruit some of those partners within your research project. So that was kind of the main one for recruitment. For retention, the big one was really articulating and communicating effectively, and that was listening to providers and partners and patients, and also communicating what their value add is for the project. So why are they valuable for this project? What type of meaningful input are they going to be able to provide, and having that follow-up with them. And then also keeping sessions accessible for partners as well. So time, location, duration, respite care as appropriate, those types of things as well. And then, again, articulating the meaningful roles for providers. So I believe, yeah, we'll have a tip sheet with hopefully some more details than that, but that's kind of the synopsis for me.
Thank you very much. It looks like we're not going to have one sheet. We're going to have many sheets. And Jerry Hodge, who's also a member of the Citizen Engagement Committee, has been listening for ideas with respect to ethics and measurement, compensation.
I'm just going to go through this last group, this last list that was given you just a minute ago. Try not to mix patients and caregivers in your data, the checkbox problem. Treat your subjects with the same courtesy as you treat your colleagues. Ensure each has a way of speaking their mind. That's just a good facilitator job. Preview the process before and ask for questions and comments after. It's all about treating the person, patient, subject, like a person, patient, subject. It's all about giving them what you're getting from them. How will you handle remuneration? And before we started the talk, I said dollar signs or in kind in some way. And then, of course, say thank you. And if you do go to remuneration, I think it will attract a different crowd of people that you may want to talk to in this arena, because of a lot of those people also get to be seniors.
Oh, no. Just have another
This
10
page
seconds
will
here.
come with the tip sheets.
Oh, good. Thank you both. Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Gill. And a very, very big thank you to our panel. A very big thank you to Olive and to Marlyn, not only for sharing your own personal experiences, but also for encouraging and continuing to encourage other older adults to get involved in research. And thanks to you for listening, and thank you for the questions, very intelligent questions from the floor. I think we're on time. So thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.